Welcome to the Unraveling the Scriptures channel. There are two phrases that are often mentioned by biblical scholars. The first is that Israel is the navel of the world, meaning we should always pay attention to what happens in this region. The second statement is that the Middle East as a whole is the central stage for many biblical prophecies, especially concerning wars and conflicts. These references are not recent. They did not arise in the last century or this one, but date back millennia. Since time immemorial, prophecy after prophecy has pointed to this region as an epicenter of crucial events. In this video, I want to discuss the current conflict between Israel and Iran, which now also involves Lebanon. But what is, in fact, the origin of this conflict between Israel and Iran? And how do Lebanon and other nations in the Middle East fit into this dispute? Let's explore the historical and geopolitical roots of this clash and understand why this region remains so central to global tension scenarios. Why are Jews and Arabs always at war? The origin of it all. The nations of the Middle East that frequently come into conflict with Israel are mentioned in various biblical texts. Among them are Iran, Palestine, and the ancient descendants of Ishmael. These conflicts, which date back to antiquity, involve historical disputes between the descendants of Ishmael and the descendants of Israel. An interesting curiosity is that these wars did not originate solely from the conflict between Israel and Ishmael, as many believe. It is common to hear the explanation that conflicts in the Middle East primarily arise due to territorial, religious, and geographical issues, often attributed to the rivalry between the descendants of Ishmael and the descendants of Isaac. But is that the whole truth? In reality, this is only half the truth. While the tension between the descendants of Ishmael and Isaac is an important factor, there are many other peoples that have battled against Israel over the last 3,000 years. And over time, many of these nations have changed dramatically in terms of ethnicity, culture, and religion. Therefore, reducing the conflicts to a simple rivalry between two ancestral groups ignores the historical and geopolitical complexity of the region. First, I want to talk about each of the nations involved in the recent events concerning Israel, Lebanon, and Iran. After all, who are these peoples according to the Holy Scriptures? Does the Bible reveal the identity of these nations? Let's start by talking about Israel. Israel, as many know, is formed by the descendants of the ancient Israelites, the Jewish people. Although over the centuries, there has been intermingling with other peoples, especially Ashkenazi Jews of European origin, Israel still preserves its roots as the chosen people in the Scriptures. But who is Iran according to the Holy Scriptures? In ancient times, the territory of Iran was home to a people who formed one of the greatest empires of the time, the Persians. Although today the country is known for its adversarial stance towards Israel, in the Bible, Persia plays an important role in the history of the Jewish people. It was the Persian king Cyrus, according to the biblical account, who freed the Israelites from Babylonian captivity, fulfilling God's purpose and allowing the people of Israel to return to their land. Therefore, Iran, in the Scriptures, is identified as the ancient Medo-Persian Empire, which had a significant influence on the history of Israel. Now, with this perspective in mind, we can analyze the role of these nations in current events and reflect on how biblical history continues to resonate in modern conflicts. An additional curiosity that is extremely relevant for those who wish to delve into biblical texts, especially prophecies, is understanding who these peoples really are. The ancient Iranians, for example, are descendants of Madai. Madai was a son of Japheth, one of Noah's 3 sons, according to the biblical genealogy. Meanwhile, the Israelites, as well as the Arabs, Syrians, and other Semitic peoples, are descendants of Shem. The ancient Persians, Medes, Parthians, and other peoples in the region that today encompasses Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan are descendants of Aryan or Indo-Aryan peoples. This means that biblically, the Medes are descendants of Madai, and it is interesting to note that there is even a similarity between the terms Medes and Madai, reinforcing this ancestral connection. Madai, according to biblical interpretations, is considered the original patriarch of the ancient Persians. Another crucial point related to biblical prophecies is the famous mention of the terrible war of Gog and Magog, which will include Iran among the nations that will attempt to invade Israel. This prophecy can be found in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 38. In verse 5 we read, "Persians, Ethiopians, and those of Put will be with them, all with shields and helmets." This passage highlights that ancient Persia, today Iran, along with other nations, will rise against Israel in a future conflict of devastating proportions. Therefore, understanding the origins of these peoples is essential for a deeper and more contextualized reading of biblical prophecies, especially when we look at current geopolitical events and how they may relate to the sacred texts. Now, speaking of Lebanon, it's important to highlight that, despite the significant presence of Islam and Islamic movements in the region, Christianity continues to be a very strong force in the country. But who is Lebanon in the Holy Scriptures? Lebanon not only appears in the Bible, but is also mentioned in several important passages. In ancient times, Lebanon was inhabited by the Sidonians and Phoenicians, Canaanite peoples, who formed a highly influential maritime civilization. These ancient inhabitants of Lebanon played a crucial role in trade and culture in the Middle East. Over the centuries, the region underwent various invasions and conquests, resulting in significant intermingling. Peoples of Arab and Semitic origin, such as Babylonians, Assyrians, and later Arabs, entered the territory, shaping Lebanon's cultural and ethnic identity. Despite these changes, the Phoenician legacy remains an important part of Lebanese history and identity, especially concerning its maritime and commercial heritage. Additionally, due to its geographical proximity to Syria, Lebanon shares much of its history and even genetics with the ancient Syrians, also known as Arameans. This blend of Phoenician, Semitic, and Aramaic influences makes Lebanon a country with a rich and complex historical and cultural heritage. In summary, Lebanon in the scriptures is often associated with the region of the Canaanites and Phoenicians, and over time, it has been influenced by numerous empires and peoples. This explains the cultural and religious diversity of the country, which, even amid conflicts, preserves its historical role in the biblical narrative and the Middle East. Essentially, Lebanon can be considered a nation of mixed origins, predominantly formed by Semitic populations, despite its older roots being linked to the Phoenicians. Now, when talking about Palestine, it's important to understand that it also reflects a complex ancestry. Palestine is not only associated with Ishmael, but also with ancient Edom, which represents Esau, Jacob's brother. Additionally, Palestine also carries the heritage of other peoples, such as the Samaritans and even some of the ancient tribes of Israel. For those who don't know, Palestinians have a very diverse ancestry in their DNA. Many people believe that Palestinians are simply Arabs, which is a misguided view. Although they indeed have Arab ancestry, especially through Ishmael and the Nabateans and Edomites, descendants of Esau, this is not their only origin. Palestinians also have Aramean, Samaritan, and even Jewish roots, especially from the tribe of Judah. Therefore, to say that Palestinians represent only the descendants of Ishmael oversimplifies a much more complex reality. The history of Palestine involves a deep mixture of peoples and cultures that have intertwined over the centuries, creating a rich and multifaceted identity. Now, talking more about the origin of the rivalry between Israel and Iran, the recent attacks by Iran against Israel, which occurred on October 1st, are just the latest episodes in an ancient and deeply rooted dispute. Israel and Iran have been engaged in a bloody rivalry for years, which has become one of the main sources of instability in the Middle East, with its intensity varying according to the current geopolitical scenario. For the Iranian government, Israel simply has no right to exist. In the view of Tehran's leaders, Israel is considered the little devil, being the main ally of the United States in the Middle East, a country they often refer to as the Great Devil. This rhetoric reflects the prevailing ideology among Iranian rulers, particularly the Ayatollahs, who see Israel as an existential enemy to be eliminated. On the other hand, Israel accuses Iran of financing and supporting various militant groups in the region that carry out attacks against its interests and security. Although, due to policy guidelines, I cannot mention the names of these groups here, many are already aware of which organizations we are talking about. These groups play a central role in Iran's strategy of indirect confrontation against Israel. The rivalry between the two countries, considered arch-enemies, has already resulted in thousands of deaths, many of them in covert operations, where neither government directly admits responsibility. This silent war, marked by espionage, sabotage, and discreet military attacks, continues to be a constant source of tension in the Middle East, with devastating consequences for the region. The reality is that we know this has already been prophesied, that there would be many wars in that region. After all, as those knowledgeable of the sacred texts, we are aware that wars, rumors of wars, nations against nations, all of this was predicted. And indeed it is happening and has been occurring for millennia. How many conflicts have we not witnessed from the time of Christ until today? The truth is that the trend is toward worsening, as neither side seems willing to concede. In my analysis, other countries in the Middle East, which have previously fought disputes and wars with Israel, may end up getting involved again, especially after Israel attacked the leader of a movement in Lebanon, and Iran began to retaliate. These confrontations are not recent, they have been long-standing. Last year, for example, Israel carried out devastating attacks, causing panic among the population and spreading terror through the streets of Jerusalem and the entire country. What we need to understand is that all these things are necessary, but the end is not yet. Matthew 24, 6-14. I see many videos claiming that the end has already come, but it is essential to read the sacred texts carefully, not only the book of Revelation, but also other books like Daniel, Ezekiel, and various other prophecies about the end times that are not restricted to Revelation. Many of these prophecies are present in both the New and Old Testaments. Although Revelation contains much of the prophecy about the end, it does not cover everything. For example, the prophecy about Gog and Magog is not described in Revelation, but rather in the book of Ezekiel, where this terrible war is mentioned. We know that the battle of Gog and Magog will take place, but it is not yet the time. This is because the nations mentioned in Ezekiel 38 that will be involved in this conflict include many others besides Iran and Lebanon. Unfortunately, many people out there are claiming that current events are Gog and Magog, but this is not true. It is essential that we do not fall into these speculations. We must analyze the biblical texts deeply and not rely on videos that lack solid foundations. Let us take the Bible as our primary source. I thank everyone who watched until now. May God bless you and see you soon.